Hi, welcome back everyone to the Beyond Lived Experience podcast. We have a guest today for the first time. Anne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ann Kasper. I'm currently with the Global Mental Health Peer Network, and I think I'm here today to talk about my many years in the peer movements and in Oregon and nationally and globally. And so we're going to talk a little about history, right?
Yes, we do like to start with an icebreaker question,
Oh,
which unfortunately I did not prepare today. Do you have one, Andrew, or I can just make one up?
Um, we could talk about places we've visited, like our favorite place, maybe.
Yeah, Anne, you're in one of your favorite places right now.
yes, I am. One of my favorite places. It's true. It's hard to pick one favorite place because for me, I travel a lot in different ages. So right now, I'm in Japan, and I do absolutely love it. I was a teacher here 30 years ago, and so I'm going to go back and visit my friends from that area tomorrow. Go see them. And Japan, for me, is a place that really brings me back to who I am. It seems very quiet, a lot quieter than the United States, a lot more orderly, and just a lot of kindness. And also, what I like here is that they work from community. It means that everyone's trying to help each other be their best. And it's different than individual competition that we see in the United States. So it's always a good reset to come here. How about you, Nybelle? What's your favorite?
I mean, what's coming to mind right now is Victoria, Canada, and you know, there's so much like touristy stuff there, but I think like when I was last there, it's just like there is a side of me that does like to indulge in like it's I like going to afternoon tea and like doing little things like that and kind of like I guess it's kind of pampering. Um and Victoria is like in a I forget what it's called, but like basically where it's placed, like the weather there is like perfect, most months out of the year, and it will like not get, below a certain like temperature or above a certain temperature. It just kind of stays in this nice like 60s to 70s range like almost all year. And so like whenever I go there, the weather's fantastic, which I really like. Um, it's difficult in, the Portland area when it's like rainy or sometimes it's like too sunny and it's too hot. It's just nice to have it be kind of like the same sort of weather all the time, like consistency. What about you, Andrew?
I haven't been to too many places, but Mexico and Oaxaca was a beautiful place. Like I loved the culture there. When I went with my dad, they were having a festival, and they had lots of like paper liner flag things like strung up everywhere from rooftop to rooftop, just all over, and just all kinds of like um, stalls and booths out with food and drinks and stuff. And we went to San Jose del Pacifico, which was in the mountains, and that was like a small village. And that was, to me, I like that even more just because it was so like peaceful and just it had people from all around the world there, but it was still like a small place, just like beautiful trees everywhere, like rich soil that you just pick up the soil and you see it like sparkle, and it has like deep reds and oranges. Um, you can pick passion fruit from the trees just all around there. It's just, it definitely filled my cup being there.
Nice. Um, so I figure like we might as well just jump into the topic. So Anne, like, how are you personally involved in the consumer survivor ex patient movement or movements?
How am I personally involved? Boy, that's a long one. I think I really got more involved in 2004 after I'd been civilly committed, and also I had been an English as a second language instructor at universities and community colleges, and so for about 20 years I wasn't allowed to purchase any insurance because I had a mental health diagnosis, and I was without any kind of health, mental health insurance for so long. I ended up getting civilly committed, and as I came out of it, they put me on the health plan, which is called the Oregon Health Plan, which we had to get at by being in a lottery at that time, unless you'd been committed. And I did win the lottery sometimes. And so I was at Cascadia Behavioral Health Care getting services, and I met other peers there, and I met other leaders there. Donita Diamata was working there, and through her we also met Becky Child. And Becky just took about 5 of us down to Salem to testify. We had no clue what was going on. All I know was we had lunch in a van, and we go in front of the testifying people. I'm like, do I want to say anything? Do I want to put my name out there because I've been a teacher? Will this affect me in the future if I testify then? But I did testify, and we still didn't actually understand what was all going on. But then I got involved. Well, at Cascadia, I found out because I was on Medicaid that they were sending me bills as well as Medicaid bills. So they're double charging. So basically Medicaid fraud. And I found out about that because they were sending me to the debt collectors. And not only me, but hundreds of people in Portland. And because also at that time I had started volunteering at NAMI, there was no peer organizations to volunteer with, and I was not doing well at that time, and I wanted to be outside of my house. So I was volunteering at NAMI answering phones, and parents were telling me too that they were paying for these Cascadia things and for these bills. So I happened to know the chair of Multnomah County at the time, Diane Lynn, because I had taken care of her children in a after-school daycare program through the city years ago. I went to Diane and said, look, I'm being doubly charged. I'm being charged, Medicaid's being charged. I don't want to pay. So that was my first step into really advocating for us. I got that stopped. I got all that Medicaid fraud stopped at that time. And yeah, that's how I got started.
So like just for timeline wise, like around like what year or like decade are we talking about when
Sure,
with these
2004.
events that you're referring to?
That was 2004. And yeah. And also, so Nybelle, I'm just checking with you because I can't see your face. Did your Wi-Fi go out? Just to check.
Oh, I mean, I can still see everyone.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I
Just
can't
check.
see you either.
Sometimes if you have a slow internet connection, it'll like turn off other people's video to
Oh, okay.
maintain
Good to
a
know.
better
I
connection
just
on your end. Yeah.
got it. I just so that you see us.
So,
Okay, good. You can take out this part. Well, there you are. Yeah.
yes.
I'll start again. So in 2000, it was in 2004 that I came to know what was the peer movement at that time. As I understand the history, some of it started actually around 1969 in Portland, Oregon, when 3 people, or a group of people, started what's called the Insane Liberation Front. And that was Dorothy Werner, Tom Whittock, and Howie the Harp. Now, Howie had come from New York to spend some time in Oregon, and he went back to New York and started big programs there. Dorothy and Tom lived in Portland, and I used to see Tom throughout the years, and I think he's still alive in Portland. It might be really interesting to get some information from him, and he would show up at meetings, up until a couple of years ago. And I remember seeing a film which Howie the Harp said Dorothy never knew what she had started, basically what her dream had turned into. She apparently left the movement, and she started making groups of people in Portland to talk about it. They had been in psychiatric hospitals. They were protesting against that. They're saying doesn't work. We don't like psychiatry. And so let's get together and help each other out. And they were also at the same time, around that time, in different places, California, in the East Coast, people coming out and making newsletters, and they started to talk with each other. So there's a lot of movement around that time. And I didn't get into 2004, so in Oregon.
Wow. I mean, there's so much like history that like I don't know. Like I was surprised to hear about some of the things that you were saying, and I feel like we don't always do a good job of like keeping our peer history, written down somewhere or like passing on the knowledge. So yeah, I'm really grateful to like have you, talking with us today, because I think this is something that like a lot of folks who are working as peers today just don't know about because they didn't experience it.
I have to say, honestly, we didn't have time to write things down. We were just trying to survive. There were no jobs, basically. You were not
Yeah.
paid for this. We created what was now jobs. And so all of us, we were doing this for free, basically. This was our survival. This is for us to move on.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. I mean,
I have a question. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah.
What kept you going with that? So you said it was your survival. Could you expand more on that? Like, what it felt like to be in that experience of like, okay, I'm doing this for free. We're working for our rights. Like, what was the feeling of being in the middle of that?
But see, it wasn't like working for free. It was the right thing to do because no one else was saying what we were saying. And through our experiences, we knew something was not working. I'm not going to go into some of the horrible things that have happened to me throughout the years in the psychiatric system because I don't think it's necessary to go back to those horrors. But we said no. We said there's a better way. And I had been actually an advocate for refugees and immigrants starting in 1983. So I had done advocacy for years in that level. I'd also done advocacy. I helped bring in 900 refugees to Oregon in the 1990s and been working with Kurdish people. So I've been working with other movements. So for me, it was natural to do that and use those skills I'd learned from other movements in this one as well. I think a lot of and I had honestly a lot of professional experience, meaning that I worked and I got my master's and I taught English as a second language. I worked at import-export. I travel. I've had exchange students live in my house. And so I had and I also worked in offices. So I had that like traditional work experience before I even stepped into this. And I think what's happening now with a lot of people is that they don't have that traditional work experience. They maybe started peer support specialists, and there's something in getting trained by working in different systems. I've worked with so many different systems that that's it. And I guess one thing is about hope, never losing hope. And I like to live off ideals. That's just who I am. And so maybe as we're going here, and you as younger or newer people, you're a little younger than me, but newer people in the movement, can you talk about maybe some of the principles and ideals that bring you to this?
I mean, I feel like it's what you said, like, it's the right thing to do. Because for me, when I came into peer support, I was like, oh, this is just going to be like a stepping stone right now. I'm going to go and get my graduate degree and whatever. And then I got into it and I was like, oh, this is wrong the way that like peer staff are treated. Like, I got to do something. I got to stay here and like make things better. um, so that's what really like called me to it is like, this isn't right. Like, I was on a team where um, the way that they spoke about the people receiving services was horrible. And I was like, this isn't okay. Like, this is why we need peers and more of them. Not, I'm half-time peer working an opposite schedule with another half-time peer so I never see them. So yeah, I mean, it like opened my eyes to a different world and wanting better services because I had like some pretty crappy experiences with mental health services and like I would have wanted a peer.
How about you, Andrew? What keeps you in this?
Definitely some similar things to what you both said. Um, I think part of it for me too was I've I've always been drawn to helping people heal. I'll just say that because I know that doesn't fully apply to peer support, but I've always felt called to the healing arts and wanting to both heal myself and walk other people through that process too, like in a holistic way. I never fully bought into this idea that some of these issues, these problems are just biological or in our brain. That never hit for me. Like I've always felt like there's more to it than that. There's the mind, body, and spirit. There's um, society. There's family. It's like it's more complicated than that. So um, yeah, I've always felt drawn to helping people navigate that. And then peer support came like very unexpectedly for me when I just basically asked, could say the universe. I just asked the universe, like, I want to do something that's just, this is going to sound so terrible. I asked the universe, I want to do something as close as possible to being a counselor without having to get the degree. I hate saying that, but that's how I said it. And then it was like, I think a week later that my friend told me about peer support. And then also during this whole thing, I was going through my own mental health. Well, I'd just gone through my own mental health crisis, and going through the training helped me to just reevaluate a lot of things, like relationships with my friends and just a lot of things. And I'm running on. But anyways, I think the biggest thing for me was it wasn't something I was expecting to get into. It just kind of just showed up. And I think I'm still processing exactly why it showed up for me. But I know a big part of it is I saw the wrongs too in the field. I saw just how messed up it is, and it really sickened me on a deep visceral level that this kind of stuff is continuing to go on for some of the most vulnerable people. And to me, that just feels disgusting. And it was very hard for me to just watch and let that happen without trying to do anything about it.
So what I'm hearing, in a way, if it's okay if I comment in here, is social justice. It's for the justice for everybody to discover themselves. that's what I'm hearing partly from both of you, and also in your own discovery, as you're helping people liberate and find themselves and find their healing, it's also healing for you too. I mean, I can say for myself, it's healing for me. And I guess too, I had been in other political movements where I saw where there was an absolute no, and I was able to change that no to a yes. So by having that success in other places before, I knew that it was possible here to change things. And I've been able to change what has been no and impossible to be different. And I had one person ask me in a Multnomah County Advisory Council meeting 15 years ago, "Oh, how can you smile at these meetings? How can you do this? How can you be, bring hope?" And it's because I had had success before. And I know as consciousness rises in a way, people get more aware of what works and having choices, and that being in boxes doesn't work for everybody. As that healing happens not only at the individual level, family level, but community level.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think like some of the work that I've done as a peer support trainer, like that has an impact on communities and like they're healing even if the folks taking that training they aren't even using it to like work as a peer. I've had people come to those trainings who are like, I'm part of a mom's group or I'm a teacher. And I think that's really cool, like that those values don't just apply to a certain job. They can be applied to humans.
I think the main value for me, a lot of it working with it, is being non-hierarchical. That's what we talk about,
Yeah.
that, or mutual, accepting people as we are. And a lot, if you look at the recent history, school systems, government systems, things like that, is more hierarchical. So actually, the peer way of thinking is coming against these old systems and saying,
Well, that's really interesting too, because I think, at least in my experience, being not only a peer but also in a management position, um, it's almost like sometimes people want you to be hierarchical with them. And when I'm coming at it from a non-hierarchical way, people are like suspicious or something, or not sure what to do with that. And I've actually, it, it feels icky, but there have been times where I'm like, it's like I kind of have done things or said things in a way that is more hierarchical because I'm not getting a response trying to do it in a different way. So I think, I don't know. It's
there's
just an
levels of
interesting observation.
understanding. And I just wanted to add into it, it's so interesting to hear about you two, about your training, because when I started there was no training, right? We had
Right.
to we made it all up.
Yeah.
Going on. And there's been a lot of wonderful people to help build what has been here. I've noticed it, did want to mention, I've noticed some of the peer values that we worked on. The movement that I was attracted to was really the movement that started out of the hospital system saying, no, this is not going to work. Because it was my own experience being in and out of hospital systems, including in Japan. And peer support's been happening, I mean, in my own experience, since the 1987, being in hospitals, on that individual kind of informal level. I mean, we help each other out to survive in these systems, which are really, really difficult to survive in. Even in Japan, I remember one man, he gave me his one only book in English. And I still have it to this day because that was his way of helping me get through that time.
It
Um,
takes many
and
forms. Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to ask and to bring up some of the. So, again, when I started, there was no training. We had to work on that. One person I did want to bring up in Oregon who really helped out a lot was Sean Clark. And those of us peers could not make what we did exactly without our allies in the government roles, without our allies in different places. And there's always been in Oregon strong allies who also see different ways of healing, who also go, I mean, and yeah, so, and it's interesting because they're working in these linear, rigid systems and helping us to create something new. And just to let you know, in Oregon, the statutes to be written, years ago, 2004, 5, 6, Scott Snedeker, who was a wonderful peer here. He made his own job twice, first in Multnomah County and then at the Oregon State Hospital. Um, he and I were at the workforce tables when they're dreaming up what will the mental health workforce look like in years and years and years to come. And we were just talking about peers and peer support, and I don't even use the term peer support, but having peers working in systems. And Scott had made his own jobs. He was able to do that at the Oregon State Hospital, and there was Oregon State Hospital in Portland, and I went to go volunteer with him. And I just want to mention it's interesting because Oregon brings in actually some of the healers. So Will Hall, I don't know if you heard about Will Hall.
Mhm.
He came to Oregon too and started Portland Hearing Voices. And we started with 4 people then, and it grew larger and it grew smaller. Now it's growing larger again. But Portland and Oregon seems to be a hub of people to be in, just to do these things. I did want to bring up the values, like some of the values. What are some words of peer values that you work with, like mutuality?
I mean, part of it is intentional peer support, like connection, exploring worldview, having mutuality in relationships, and moving towards. And then I also really like SAMHSA's core competencies for peer workers that has the peer values of being person-centered, trauma-informed, that peer support is voluntary. I'm forgetting a couple of them. But those are the big ones for me. It helps to have some kind of structure, and I know the SAMHSA guidelines didn't come out till like 2018 or something like that. Anything to add on that, Andrew?
We were working more from liberation. I would say more from liberation. Like let's find our own way without structure. Structure does help though. Drew, how about you?
Yeah.
I love both of them because I think we need both yin and yang of that. For me, I feel I came into it with a lot of the values that I got from other places. So like the idea that like there's an inner healer or an inner authority that if we just tune into our deeper selves, our deeper nature, and just ask the question, like we have the answers within ourselves. I heard that from other sources, and it really aligned with IPS, how IPS talks about like the goal is really to help people find their own answers. It's not to tell them what to do. It's not to dictate. And so I think that value is definitely huge for me, and it's what I try to foster and encourage. Also community. I think peer support in a lot of ways is I think peer support tries to build community, and when it's in a professional context, I think it's kind of like a stand-in for community when people don't have it, and in some cases can be a bridge to that. But I feel like the heart of peer support is to somehow build and create community for people who feel out of place in this world, who feel like they're not understood by society, that they're cast aside and judged and shamed for being different. They're pathologized for having big emotions, big feelings, different thoughts, different experiences of reality. I think peer support tries to point the way towards like a community where that's accepted and that's explored. It's not shunned.
Yeah, I think normalization is a huge part of it, just like acceptance.
What does normalization mean? Because we like to say normal is only a setting on a washing machine.
What I mean by that is like that rather than being like othering, where it's like, oh, this person, they have certain experiences and, they need to just be over here, in the hospital or in a room with a therapist or whatever, that there is actually openness and that it's a normal part of our society for people to share about these struggles and not be treated differently.
I did
Um,
want to bring up what I heard from, it was okay for Andrew, and talk about choice and self-efficacy. Adrienne Fries was a woman in Oregon who was working in developmental disabilities. I don't know the right words to use right now because they've changed the terms, but they have these things called brokerages where the person themselves can choose what they want their money to be used for. So Adrian and a couple other people who are working in development, it was called DD at the time, development disabilities. It's called something else now. And
Intellectual disabilities.
yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know what the
But people
ID, I
still
guess.
use the term DD still, so it's
yeah,
fine.
I've heard that still used.
I have to be really careful about terms these days. Things keep changing. But she started a brokerage, and it was called Self. See the boy. Now I've lost the word. Anyway, Empowerment Initiatives, and through that brokerage, it means that they got money from Multnomah County for, let's say, at that time it was I believe $2,000 a year, and the person there, through what's now called self-directed services, got to choose what's done for the with the money. And actually, I got one of the scholarships in 2004. I'd just gotten out of the hospital of being locked up in this horrible hospital of being civilly committed and that whole trial thing. And I was at Cascadia waiting for my first appointment, which you have to go to the appointment after being committed. Adrian's sitting there waiting for her appointment with the manager, and we started talking. And that's how I found out about that program. I ended up working with Empowerment Initiatives. It turned out to be the peer-run organization that made it to about, I think, $2 million. And they had an office in Southeast Portland, and they started doing the first peer services really in the Portland area, also Clackamas County. And they went out, and there's a place called Villebois, and they were hired to work in Villebois, which is built on grounds that used to be old hospital grounds. There are residences there with people with mental health issues who live together in apartments. And the apartment that they worked at, called Renaissance Court, was getting phone calls to the police, to the fire, like almost every day, a couple of times, because they were having conflicts. The residents were having conflicts with each other. Empowerment Initiatives went in and said, look, if we have an office here, we sell these conflicts in the peer way. And so they had one of the apartments turned into an office. They had coffee, they did classes, they did peer support. I actually worked there for 3 years, so that's why I know it very intimately as well. And guess what? Those calls went from daily to almost none. So it saved the system lots of money, and people got peer support.
Wow.
And after that too, I know that they made another one of the apartments in that complex, a warm line area. So people who lived in the apartments could actually go work on the warm line in their residences.
Wow.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? And
What happened to it?
Uh, well, okay, what happened to Empower Initiatives, what happened to other... I want to also give one more shout out to a project I really loved, which was through Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare. A bunch of us were clients there, for lack of better words. You know, we were going to behavior, and we hated it. And there was just a lot of animosity, and we actually protested in the parking lot sometimes. We had huge protests. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. We had to get our rights, to get just basic care. Even one time, I remember it used to get your medication, you had to be the first to show up. If you didn't show up, you didn't get a medication appointment for another couple months. It was crazy. So anyway, at the Cascadia people, we got together, the art people were doing the art classes, and we made our own art studio. So in Portland, Southeast Portland, near Reed College, we had a peer-run art studio. And it was called In Our Mind's Eye. It was wonderful. And then we have so many wonderful artists in Oregon, in Portland, who are peers. They ran the whole thing. So, but what happened to In Our Mind's Eye? What happened to Empowerment Initiatives? Unfortunately, the finances were not handled well. And so I've seen other peer initiatives in Oregon fail because they didn't have the business background. They worked from heart and soul and knew what to do with people, like the bookkeeping, the record keeping. Multnomah County, with Empower Initiatives, it happened that they didn't like the record keeping. Multnomah County came in and took it and gave it to a place called Luchtdorf, which has a different new narrative now. So they took that. So what started as peer run got taken over. I did want to also talk to you what I heard from Nybelle also about not being treated well. I have personally not been treated well for years in rooms. And I don't think people of this generation understand what it was for us to be in those places where we really were not welcomed at all. Zero. And it's been through those of us who have made relationships with power people, with managers, with people in government, that now any peer can step into a room and like they want to be listened to. I don't know if you can imagine being in a room where they don't want you at all, and they don't want to hear what you want to say.
I think it's different. You know, it's not a dichotomy, but you know, I've had experiences of like, you know, maybe I'm in there, but people don't want to listen to anything I have to say, or the response is like silence. So, yeah, it kind of depends on the context, I think, but there is.
So what I had to do is to be in places where I was not accepted whatsoever, and be quiet and be insulted, and it made me think. About one of your comments a couple of weeks ago just made me think like how much trauma I've put myself into for the sake of these values. What have I done to myself in a way? Because in the past, we really were not accepted at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not the same, but I've been asking myself the same question. And I think part of that is isolation. I mean, I actually like had a conversation with a coworker earlier today, and it turned into peer support. I wasn't even expecting it with our, you know, quality assurance person of all people. But we started talking, and it was like, wow, you know, we've both just been like alone in our experiences, even though what we were speaking to was kind of different. Her stuff was more physical health, and you know, my pieces are more mental health, but there was so much overlap in that conversation. I'm like, was there really a difference? And I think like it is cool that things are at a stage where like I at least feel like I can have those conversations with my coworkers, because I think definitely when I started in the field, it was just like it was like, yeah, you know, we'll let you talk, but we're not going to actually do anything. So that's almost worse, to be like vulnerable and just nothing's done. Or it's different. I guess there's no need to compare, but
No, there's no comparison.
yeah.
But if those of us who didn't sit in these rooms and just make our way in there, I have just snuck into places. I've use my political savvy to get to know. I mean, and actually, people invite me places too. But without having that first person there, things wouldn't have changed at all. So I think that's one reason why I did it, because I knew I could get into places, but it is hard, and it's yeah. I did a lot of exercise. I did a lot of screaming. I did a lot of crying. I have a lot of diaries of like even working with the police. They asked me 3 times after James Chassie was killed to be on their commission, which changed things for the police. And that was in 2006. And that is the film Alien Boy talks about the whole thing. But I was invited by the mayor to be at those tables, and no one else was allowed to be there as a peer. And I remember just being furious at the police across the table from me, because I mean it's on film what happened to him, literally physically, why he's dead. And I was furious at them. They were treating me, I was the only person at that table allowed to speak, really, really terribly the whole time. the leadership, the whole thing. But I knew it was a very special privilege to be there. So I did my best. And throughout the years, that anger and just being at the table continuously. I was also on the local public safety commission, Multnomah County, for years. One of my mentors, the peer mentors, just kind of dumped me there because no one else wanted to do it. Just by being there for years and getting to know people, we started making relationships. And so the anger shifted to relationships, shifted to getting to know each other, shifted to my attitude changing towards police and their attitude changing towards peers. And so I just wanted to add, one of the most beautiful things happened a couple years ago when I was sitting and I snuck on this table again at the Portland Street Response Planning table at City Hall. The police got me on there because no other peers were there, allowed to be there. No one with mental health issues was allowed to be speaking about this whole program made for mental health people like us. And I watched and sat back and watched the police speak up for us. They were the only one at the whole table to speak for us in Portland because a couple of us, Gary Scholander and I and other people, have made such good relations that the people we've worked with, the police people we've worked with, change their minds. And they see the value of having peers everywhere. The police, Portland police, were asking at that table, where are the peers? Why aren't the peers here? Like in the same, literally. Wow. So it's even going back to IPS, it's a relationship. And so my anger transformed. Their anger transformed. And I was at a meeting a couple years ago on this other thing from Multnomah County, and I had mentioned to the police person there at the table, and we're on the table, like, you know how they treated me? Literally, and it was just really hard to be there and to be insulted and things like that. And she turned around and apologized to me, really sincerely. I thought, wow, this is just so beautiful. So it's learning to grow as a human. And the police now, they do everything they can with peers by having peers around when they plan things. They really do. I know that in Portland. It's about that relationship. And seeing the vision beyond, because if I hadn't been able to see that beyond, like there's a point where we could actually start to work together, if I couldn't hold that vision, what was I doing at those tables besides being angry?
Right, yeah, I mean, I think like that really speaks to like experiences I'm having now of like, yeah, needing to build those relationships with allies. Or
I think
future
everybody's
allies.
I think we don't really have enemies. We just have people who don't understand what
Yeah,
may work for others. I think it's just a matter of understanding. And some people will never maybe understand that there's different ways to heal. And that's okay, as long as we have safe spaces.
yeah, and I think that's why I lean on like more concrete concepts for values rather than like more nebulous concepts, because I've spent so much time trying to help others understand that some folks like having it laid out in black and white like that, of like, here are the values on a silver platter, rather than if I say liberation, people are like, huh, what, what does that mean?
Because they had never been locked up themselves. They hadn't personally been through those experiences. So why would they understand it, right? There's
Yeah.
no reason. Yeah. Yeah. So good luck with that. Good luck with helping people understand. Yeah, I think choice is a big thing for any of us peer movements wherever we are. East Coast, West Coast is actually very different. It's very interesting to be on the East Coast, and I was at a conference last year, and they go back and talk about the history, and they had like 20 people up on stage that were saying thank you to. And in Oregon, I don't know. It's like the history like pushed down. It's the strangest thing, but in some places, actually, they do revere what's history there. There's On Our Own is a good book to read to start with. There and more things are coming out, and more videos are coming out. I know. I'll put some of my old videos also back on YouTube. I had done 20 interviews starting in 2004, 2005 on cable access TV. And in fact, the first office of, I don't know what they call it now at the state level for consumers. They keep changing the name there.
Oh.
We actually fought to get that office in there. One quick story too. So there was an administrator for the state of Oregon. His name is Bob, and I can't think of his last name right now, but that's okay. Bob. He got this idea about bringing peers down to Salem once a month to talk and what's going on. So we actually weren't paid. We just kind of I took people out of the hospital or whoever I knew and support groups and in my old cars and drive down to Salem once a month. And it was an open meeting. It was really great. And after a while, this guy Bob had, it was not, I want to mention too, it's not only Bob, but the people who worked with him. His staff helped bring this in. You have administrators, but I know that his staff really helped get this going and kept it going for years, which has turned into now the Oregon Consumer Advisory Council. But it started off just going down there and talking about what's going on, and it helped him understand what's going on in different parts of Oregon. And we weren't paid to be there. We're just going down there doing our stuff. Later on, he had a man named Michael Libachek kind of take the reins. And Michael is very good at getting the groups to work together and listen to each other. And Michael went on to work for the state of Oregon. There's also a few people who went on to work in state places, and we also worked and got peers to work in the Oregon State Hospital. Scott Snedeker was a big part of that. So now we actually have a team of peers that work in the Oregon State Hospital, really good salaries. I did want to mention for Multnomah County, so I talked to you about how I found the Medicaid fraud. And then after that, the quality assurance woman, the manager, came to me and said, Ann, would you volunteer? Would you be in our offices? I'm like, what? Okay, so I just fought with you. I got you to stop doing something illegal, and now you want me to be in your offices. Okay, so I was there for 6 years. And at some point of the 6 years doing quality assurance, and also vocabulary wasn't very nice about us. So I was on these cubicles. When I heard something that wasn't really nice to us or equal or peer stuff, I just go around the cubicle. You could use different words for that. and set that example. And I put SAMHSA posters all over the walls and just trying to set. They were scared to have a peer there. They had peers like 10 years before that. They were gone, and they were still really scared to have a peer on the 5th floor of the Multnomah County Mental Health and Addictions office. And I was that peer to bring in, like, oh, it's okay to actually have a peer sitting at the table. And after a couple of years of being there doing, actually I used to help write his newsletter to hundreds of thousands of people, actually, and peers. I got peers to put art in there and articles. And I also made, what's it called, the small group, like feedback sessions, and got the county to pay people. And so they had 50 people come in one night in small groups and talk about what's going on in mental health at the county. Focus groups, that's it. And so after doing that for a couple of years, the ESA, Early Assessment and Support Alliance manager, Robert Jans, came to me secretly, quietly one day and said, Ann, can you have a meeting 10 o'clock on Thursday? I was like, we'll meet you in that back room back there. Okay, sure, Robert. Yeah, nice to meet you. And yes, I love working with young people. So we actually sat down, and I'm sitting there. Okay, what does Robert want? What's going on here? And he says, I want to have peer support for ESA. And at that time, having mental health peer support worker was not accepted. I was not paid. I couldn't get paid. I actually, after 6 years, I went to them and said, hey, can you like pay me for this work I'm doing here? They refused. So anyway, Robert came to me secretly like this and said, I want to start, so let's work on it. So we actually took 3 years having a secret committee with his staff, and we got some other black people from the community come in. So we had a diverse committee, and we made the first position in Multnomah County in peer support in mental health. And I said, look, the salary has to be good. So no less than a first counselor level 1. So we got the salary to be counselor level 1. And it was through like those allies that we started it. Unfortunately, the first person they hired got fired And the first three peers who really work from the heart of mental health, those kind of principles in mental health, and not addiction principles, which are good, just different principles in peer support, got fired in Multnomah County. Because if you actually, at that time, I don't know how it is now because we don't have people working from those principles, but if we did, I hope they wouldn't get fired like the first three did. So, but anyway, they're like success.
It's,
Like there's like I got actually helped bake that, but that was Robert's idea. I helped support him in that,
Yeah,
and
I was
now
just
they have
like
ISA
taking all that
peers all
in.
over the state. Right? They have them all. Every single ISA has a peer now.
and
Not
it's a big
quite.
deal.
Well,
At least
maybe not
last I
quite, but
heard,
they, yeah.
ISA, there are more peer positions, but not in every county.
Okay.
But I think that eventually that's the goal,
Oh, okay.
however that looks. But I know someone who was in ISA, I can't remember which county, but she was like hounding them, like, when are you going to have a peer support position? I want to work for you. And she was like hounding them for like
Yeah.
months. And so, yeah, there's still some disconnects, I think. Were you going to say something, Andrew?
Oh yeah, I was wondering if you could expand a bit on with with those people when they got fired and how they got fired. Just curious.
Yeah, I don't know if I can legally, and you know
Oh,
how
I
it is.
see.
It's so
Okay.
messy. What I was watching though was different ways of choosing to work with people,
Hmm.
um, and what would be the peer way that, let's say IPS or the peer way of working was not accepted, and if there was a problem, the peer got blamed for the problem. Or if they spoke up too much about what should be done in a mental health way, about choices, about things like that. But you know, every individual is different, and maybe part of it was the hiring process as well. But Multnomah County has a lot. I've always had addiction peers, and a whole big department of addiction, but not mental health. So
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes, like, well, a lot of times, like, clinical settings hire on a peer and then don't understand what it is that they're actually hiring for. Like, they don't understand what peer support really is, and what they actually want is, like, someone who is like a poster child for the mental health system and will like help people comply with their treatment when in fact that's like the opposite of what peer support is. So yeah, I mean, this just reminds me of things that are still coming up like in my own work. Like um, I was shadowing someone at one of the programs where I work, and another staff member told the peer, um, well, you know, you're going to take so and so on this country drive. You need to remind them when they come back to um, fill their med box or you know whatever. And I was like, no, like that person should not be asking the peer to do that.
and actually when we started, this was never our intention to have that happen. Actually, when we started this, we never intended to have it be a big job.
Right,
We were just doing it to keep alive and to
right.
keep, as Andrew said, to keep community. And we actually had big support groups at night and activities together. So it's interesting to watch it become a job uh, without it being intended to be that way. We
Yeah.
also have to be supported somehow. So it's fascinating to watch that. And I'm glad that you're there, Nybelle. I'm glad that people who understand the values are there. And it's growing so quickly now that systems do need to be educated. What is peer support? What's going to work? What's going to work for people in the working system as well as the non working system? and make sure that I've also seen peers who maybe didn't have all the office skills
Right.
I, to operate in these offices, and that caused some of the problems as well.
Yeah, I think like I don't know why for some reason I wanted to preface this with unfortunately. It just is what it is. I think the fact that I have a bachelor's degree and like, I had to write papers and like be all detail oriented and have the margins be like a certain amount in the citations and all that and reading research papers, all of that helped me to have the skill set to be successful in my role as a peer and as a peer leader. A lot of people don't know how to read research or how to look things up or
Well, I wanted to add to literacy too, because not everybody has all these like college level skills who are
yeah,
peers, and wouldn't it be a great world that we wouldn't have to work within these government systems and
I
just do
know.
peer
Yes.
support as peer support,
Right.
Yep.
and
Yeah,
that's would
there's
be the
That
dream.
is
That would
one of
be
them.
more.
yeah,
It's
I
something we
think
wouldn't have to fit in. We could be who we are and
yeah,
do
Yep.
what we're supposed to do, and not have to explain to anybody, but still be held accountable. I think accountability is important
yeah,
for any job, for
yes.
any organization, and that's what I think would happen with peer things in Oregon. Some of them
But
fell apart because there wasn't that accountability.
Well,
and we can hold each other accountable. We
Yeah,
don't
yes.
need
in a nice way.
in an yeah co-reflection.
I was
Yes.
just gonna mention too that like I've seen a lot of good peers like be held back because of struggles with technology, and it's like, well, ideally, like they would just be able to do their job and talk to people and not have to worry about technology to write up, whatever was said. It's just like
When we
that's
started, we didn't have to take notes. Put it that way. We just did
yeah,
our
and
work. And
now
then
Mhm.
actually, I need to get going because
oh,
it's time for me to go. But maybe I can come back sometime and tell you some more history stories. Thank
yeah,
you for letting me do this.
That'd be great.
Really
yeah, that would be
appreciate this.
great. I mean, if you need to head out, and just feel free to jump off, and we can kind
Yeah.
of like wrap things up.
Yeah, no,
So
I actually I do. I really, really appreciate this, and I appreciate being able to tell some of these stories, and also to watch the peer movement has changed me. And even when there's friction with people and friction, maybe they don't work for the same values, whatever we can do together to work for our own choices, our
yeah,
own empowerment, as whatever we define it is important.
yeah,
So thank you for having me.
totally.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
All right, thanks.
Have fun, Ann.
you.
Bye.
Yes, have fun at the beach. um, Man, Anne has really good boundaries. That was like almost exactly an hour.
Yeah, she
um,
does. She's good at that.
so yeah, I mean, it's really cool to learn about that stuff. Um, I think
Definitely.
it's important for us to like remember where we came from as peers, and it's also like layered and complex. Um, that there's definitely a lot there. There's a lot of
Yeah.
experience and knowledge that it's just, I'm grateful like we have this podcast to like keep some of this history. um,
Yeah, exactly.
so
It would be so
yeah,
cool to also bring on someone. I really love actually that Anne was on the front lines of like the first peer who became a professional here in Oregon. Like that's a big
yeah,
deal. Like there's a lot more I want to unpack with her around that because I think that's just there's a lot to explore with that. Um, and I'm curious too about bringing someone on who was part of that original movement too, and like what that was like. Like how
yeah,
did they first start and like that whole journey of like I'm sure they had to be very resourceful to like figure things out. And
yeah,
I'm very curious too about addiction peers because I think that's a whole separate thing. But I'm curious about having dialogue with that too, like the that side of it.
Yeah, because I don't know as much of the history on the addiction side of things either. So, yeah, it's it's definitely a lot to digest and like think about, and also like how it applies to like things that are happening today. Because I do
Hmm.
think something I was kind of like reflecting on as Anne was talking is that I feel like a lot of stigma and discrimination these days kind of happens through a lens of like silence or like stonewalling, and a lot of what Anne went through was very like explicit. It was explicitly stated in one way or another, people's thoughts, or that you not being wanted. And I think like it's it is different, and in some ways like I almost struggle more because when somebody is like overtly discriminatory in like statements that they make, then you can point to that and be like, yeah, don't say this shit. But if somebody's like being really sneaky about it, then it's a lot harder to call that out because people can just make excuses and say that's not the reason why. Or but
Gaslight you.
yeah, it's like, I guess, if you call that stuff out enough, people are going to learn how to be more covert about it. uh,
Hmm.
but
Yep.
it's hard to like put a finger on that and be like, this isn't, you know, you're you're not like actually showing acceptance around this. Um,
Exactly.
or I've had people be like, yeah, peer support's great and blah 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 blah, and then like their actions, they're not collaborating. So saying one thing, doing another. It's
I I think part of that, I'd be curious to hear your feedback on this too. I think that one aspect that plays into that is the worldview clash, because
right.
the clinical worldview really is so different from like the peer worldview or the recovery model. It's like clinicians, like when they're going through school, like they're taught that mental, there's a thing called mental illness that arises from the brain, arises from chemical imbalances, and it is your job to help people cope through those imbalances, learn new skills, and to get them on medication. And it's a very, I think, restrictive worldview that is mechanical. And then the recovery or peer model, I think it has a lot in common with other worldviews that are, you could say, like indigenous worldviews. I've had a conversation with a peer who's indigenous who says there's a lot of commonalities with the peer values and indigenous values. Um, I think a lot of holistic health practitioners have similar worldview that we have. Like there's a lot of overlap where it's not so much about us being the expert of someone else. It's not about us like dictating or thinking in like a mechanical way. It's more about like the process, and it's more about helping the could say the inner healing mechanism to do its own thing. And um, the whole idea that acceptance goes a long way. It's not about fighting ourselves. It's about learning how to accept these parts of ourselves that we reject.
Yeah, I
It's like a
it's
clinician has to, they really have to kind of like, in order to for us to truly collaborate effectively, we can't just agree to that and say, okay, we're going to work together. Like, for that to actually happen involves that we have to actually reevaluate our worldviews because they're
Yeah.
inherently in conflict.
And it's
And
not
a
easy to do
clinician
that.
believes that it's not easy to do that. It takes a lot of work. For some people, it feels like an actual existential threat. Um, it might tie into so many other things about that person's life, like their social status in society, and their education, like going into so much debt to get that degree, but having to go to reevaluate everything that they were taught and throw potentially some of those things out. Like it's a big deal for some people.
Yeah, and I think too that like some of that worldview shifting involves a level of nuance that people have not been taught to or encouraged to explore. I mean, like I've even had like shifts in my own worldview around peer support
Mhm.
where I'm like, maybe some people would call it co-optation, but I think for me, like, it's like, case management doesn't have to be a dirty word. Like,
Yeah,
no case management for peers, zero. It's like, okay, what I think of as case management, that brings up a certain images or scenarios for me. And I learned that like there are some things that peers do commonly that would fall into case management, but it's not like it doesn't have to be like in a hierarchical way. Like
sure.
if I give somebody a list of support groups, technically you could say the time that I spent researching online and all of that was case management. And then
Totally.
you but it's like I think that that's appropriate for a peer to do. Like I don't think it's inappropriate for
Yeah,
somebody to send like resources.
absolutely.
So I'm just
I
like
think there's a
don't.
lot that we.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say don't have peers taking people to the social security office, you know,
Oh,
randomly. That's more of like the case management where it's like
uh-huh.
we just need this thing done. Please babysit the person.
Mhm. Yeah, and which kind of puts us in a subservient role if it's more
Yeah.
like, oh, this is something I don't want to do, so you do it. Like, yeah, that's
Or
not
nobody else
cool.
has time. It's like,
Right. So it's like
no.
there's definitely like that social status hierarchy thing at play too that I think makes it difficult for us to collaborate. I think people who have less ego, like it's easier to collaborate with them.
Yeah.
You know, who don't care about that hierarchy as much. They just want to. They're there for a purpose. They're there. If their number one purpose is I'm here to help people. I'm here to serve, and the rest of it isn't important. I think those are the easiest people to work with.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just like, I want places that are helpful for people who
Hmm.
are in those systems and not like causing more damage. And to me, like any kind of ego or like infighting about who is supposed to do what is just ultimately a distraction from the healing work that we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and we can slip in and out of it too. Like I know there are times where I've slipped in and out of it, and
Yeah.
we can get distracted from our sense of purpose, our calling. Um, so it's like sometimes it's helpful to have like reminders of that, or um, catch ourselves when we're doing that. But yeah, I think worldview it's a huge thing. I don't think we're going to truly be able to collaborate with other types of providers without us having that kind of dialogue. And I think peers can fall into we can fall into like you were saying about case management, like our own dogma, and we can create like our own rigid worldview too. Like I know there's some peers who are on one end of the blah 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 one end of the extreme where it's like um, no psychiatry at all ever, no, like screw clinicians, like, and I think that's too far too. You know, it's like there there are people who find value in like psychiatry and therapy, and just because there are like toxic elements of the mental health system and things that we really need to change like desperately, it doesn't mean like there's nothing that's working. I mean, we just gotta sift through it, you know?
Yeah. Um, I did have a question for you. Like, if part of this is shifting worldviews, like, do you think that the emotional labor should be, like, where should that lie? Because I feel like, at least for me, like, a lot of the emotional labor around, like, shifting worldviews has lied with peers. Or, you know, the one or two people who happen to
Hmm.
be in a peer leadership position at a giant organization at that time. Um, but I don't see as much of that happening on the other end, on other sides of
Yeah.
it.
I think the reality is that some people are ready to look at their worldviews. And this isn't general, like, this isn't even just specific to like peers and clinicians. Like, this is like every human being. Like,
Right.
um, some people are ready and willing to look at their worldview and question it, and some people aren't. And I think it you can't really force someone to do that. Like, you can invite them and then maybe hold some space for them to explore like what's the resistance there, what's blocking it. Um, you can do that to an extent, but ultimately, like, you can't really force anyone to. And so I think it's really more about opening the space, sending the invitation, and really voicing clear and creating like a clear line in the sand of like, this is what we need to collaborate. Um, it's hard right now with peers, I think, because we're in such a position that we kind of rely on um, we rely on the hierarchy. We
Yeah.
rely on like the system the way it is. But I think if we were in more of an independent position or had more flexibility, we could draw that line in the sand and be like, we're not going to work with you if you're not willing to have this dialogue with us. We're just not. And um, ultimately, like, if I was to stay in the peer field, and I'm seriously considering leaving it, if I was to stay in the peer field, that would be my line in the sand. Like, I'm not going to work with you if you're not going to have the openness to question your own worldview.
Mm.
And I'm going to be willing to question my own too. It doesn't mean like, oh, I'm shifting all this onto any one person. We all have to be willing to. And we all have to do the work together. But it is each of our own individual responsibility to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I agree that that goes for everyone because, like, if we ask others to do that, we have to be willing to do that ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't just go enforcing our worldview on others. Like, we need to be able to hear different perspectives and come to some kind of understanding. Um, because I'm not interested in leading some kind of peer dictatorship. Like, that's not what I
Yeah,
want.
exactly. Or we can, the thing is, like, we have the toolkit to, I think, set the space. So, like, we know how to explore worldviews with people. We do it with the people that we work with, and I think if we can find a way to do it in an equal ground setting with other types of providers, I think that sets the tone. So like I was saying before, like we can send the invitation and we can explore um, I think asking the right questions about I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head. So I mean, this is a rough sketch. Don't take this as the full picture, but we could we could elicit their worldview as it is. Just help them clarify what is your worldview as you understand it right now. Because I mean, even just that, people don't always consciously think about it. Like they take
Yeah.
in information, they assimilate worldviews over time, like from parents and peers and school, but they don't always reflect on it. So like even just that one question, I think is a good place to start. Like, well, help me understand, what is your worldview currently? Like, what does it look like, and why do you believe it? I think that like already sets things in motion, and most people I think would be willing to share what their worldview currently is. And then from there, we can ask more exploratory questions around that. We can riff off that and be like, um, what does that mean? Could you unpack that more? Asking like good questions. And sometimes even I think that's just enough to help things kind of help things unravel that maybe weren't working for them. Um, I mean, I see it just on an individual level with just work I've done with people. Some of it with peer support, some of it with like coaching and hypnosis, where sometimes just asking the right question in in the right way starts to help people shift perspective and see it in like a new light.
Uh, the hard thing is, I think doing that requires like time and space, and like
Hmm.
people don't always have that.
That's true. The other thing too is that there already are people out there. There are clinicians. There are healthcare professionals out there who I think already share our same values, and the worldviews might not be exactly the same, but I think there's a lot of overlap. Like um, with therapists I've worked with, like sought out, like I've always sought out therapists who I feel like align with my values, and so I guess I know they're out there. They're definitely out there, and some of them might not be working for. They might not be working in like the mainstream
Right.
mental health sense. They might have like a private practice somewhere where they're just working with like a handful of people, but they're still out there. And I've even talked to some clinicians in agency settings who've told me like, oh yeah, I have these views, but I don't feel safe sharing them with my colleagues because I don't want to be
Yeah.
like shamed or like ostracized. So there are people who maybe aren't, they don't feel like they can be fully themselves and share their full worldview because they feel like they don't fit in. Um, so I think even like one of the first steps too could also be like reaching out to the people who already share our values and building bridges with them.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I just feel like people shouldn't have to feel like they're going to be ostracized for having like humanistic values. Like, don't you think it should be
Yeah.
the opposite?
Yeah.
Like,
If it was the
uh,
opposite, we would have such a different world.
I feel, my perspective is like, if you're treating, people in a hierarchical or like just totally illness based way, like that behavior should be ostracized because it's like, how do you
Yeah.
think this is okay?
My hope is that like 50 years from now, that'll be the case. We'll be looking back on today and being like, that was so not cool the way things were. Like,
Yeah,
um,
someone will be interviewing us on their like brain, you know, satellite thing. We won't have podcasts anymore. It'll just like broadcast thoughts into like people's brain chips,
yeah,
or whatever, wherever technology's at in 50 years.
yeah, exactly.
The
Direct
hologram
transmission.
test.
Man, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's my hope is like a future where, these values are not like going against the mainstream. And I mean, I think like there has definitely been shifts. Um, like being able to listen to psychiatrists and therapists on YouTube
hmm
where I'm like, huh, that's really interesting and sounds a lot like
like Dr.
pure
K.
values. Like, what's happening?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, Dr. K, right? Like
Yeah.
he's awesome. And that other guy that I shared that
Um,
video with you, forget his name now. Shoot, but he's really cool too.
oh, yeah, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I also listened to psychology in Seattle for a while. That's
Yeah.
Dr. Honda, and like I was just like, a lot of this is pure stuff. And it was interesting too because like he is like totally not aware of the pure movement at all because he had a guest on because he was like, what is this peer support person thing, like in a question that a viewer had, and his guest that was on was like kind of explaining it. So it was like interesting how there's like alignment in these values, but he's like totally unaware that like this whole
Yeah.
thing is happening.
That's the awesome thing. Like I see in the world right now that there are these different currents going on that are basically saying the same thing, like maybe in different ways, but and they're not all communicating with each other yet. But I think
Yeah.
it's cool that they're popping up. Good, like that gives me hope too that there's basically the same core message being said in multiple ways.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know, stuff like that has helped me to like speak clinicians' language a little bit and bridge some of those worldviews.
Yeah. And the
So,
thing too is like this is there's this guy Charles Eisenstein. He has some really cool stuff on YouTube. He wrote a few books like Sacred Economics and The Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I think that's the title of it. Um, but he talks about like the story of civilization and that we've been living in a story. He calls it the story of separation, where things are mechanical. There's a focus on exploitation and extraction. There's focus on individualism without care for the collective. Um, seeing the world as things to use rather than being in relationship with them.
hmm,
And he says like this is like the dominant paradigm for most of the Western world, and it influences like every aspect of our society. Like we know directly how it influences mental health because it like the clinical worldview is a direct like offshoot of that. but we also see it in education. We see it in politics and government. We see it in broader healthcare, like you were
Yeah.
saying earlier about your conversation with your coworker. Like it's in the medical sphere too. So it like affects every aspect of our society. And he talks about a shift in that story, that paradigm to one he calls of interbeing, which is more being in relationship with and power over. And it's about valuing everything. It's about not exploiting, but like mutuality, co-creation, um, respecting each other, respecting nature.
Yeah, and a lot of that is missing in our
Yeah,
consumer culture. Yeah, it's hard to like hold the dichotomy of things, like how we want things to be and what has been built up on and kind of countercultures that are arising as a result of that. And then,
yeah, exactly. It's like we're, and I also love how Anne said earlier that it's movements, not movement. Like
right,
she just talking about peer support, like peer movements, and
right.
then there's even a larger context of all of the movements that have been trying to shift the culture, trying to shift the paradigm. Um, that shows up in so many different ways, and that does give me a lot of hope that it might not be easy, it might not be a straight line, but and things very well I think could get harder before they get better. But um, I do see that lots of different people. I feel it feels like our hearts want the same thing, and we're just all trying to figure out how to get it, how to get to that point.
Yeah. Hmm. I don't know how to wrap this up.
Um, I don't either. How about this?
That's okay. Yeah.
Um, I'll just okay. I'll just stream of consciousness something if you want. If
Okay.
so, you're walking through a forest and you see a bunch of trees and flowers and stuff. Um, and you go to sniff a flower. um, what does the flower smell like?
Oh, I don't know how to I don't know how to describe smells because I have bad allergies. I don't sniff very many flowers. I guess that's my stream of consciousness. I don't know. I think most flowers have like a perfumey smell. I don't have a great sense of
I
smell.
what about taste?
I did try eating dandelion once, and it was terrible.
Oh, the flower or the
Them.
leaf? The stem. Ooh, it has
Yeah,
that
it
gooey
was.
white stuff in it too.
Yeah, it was bad because, like, okay, when I was in elementary school, I was, learning about the plants and like, plants need sugars to feed themselves, and I saw it was white inside. I was like, oh, I bet that tastes like sugar. No, that was my thought process. And I was very
Ew.
disappointed, and I was like, I'm not gonna put any other things in my mouth.
The roots, um, so if you dry and grind up the roots, it tastes a little bit like coffee if you make it
Oh,
into a tea, like dried dandelion root, and it's a great detoxifier, great for your liver.
well, I did not have the resources or knowledge as a third grader to um,
Yeah.
know how to navigate that.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Good to know.
definitely. I've been smelling lavender a lot. Like lately, there's so much lavender that grows around me, and lately, when I'm noticing I'm just like stressed and anxious, but I'm just walking outside and I happen to see some lavender, I've just been grabbing it and like rubbing it between my hands and then sniffing it because it's like a good relaxant.
Yeah, I
And I
think I
look
have
so
like
weird doing it, I'm sure, like sniffing my hands in public, walking down the street. I'm
all
sure people give me so many
people do
weird
weird
looks, but
stuff all the time. I mean
but
I
it helps though. It really helps just to get that. Oh,
well
it's just nice.
I like eucalyptus oil for that. Um, because eucalyptus oil is often used as like a, I guess, a homeopathic treatment in my family. um,
It's great for lungs.
yeah, and I also think I have a slight allergy to lavender or something because anytime I've tried to use like lavender stuff, my throat feels like puffy. So
Ooh.
yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
have a relaxing effect for me because I'm like, I don't think I'm responding to this correctly.
Yeah, that's not good.
So yeah, I haven't like gone into anaphylactic shock or something like that, but it's just like, oh, this is not relaxing.
Mm, not good. Yeah.
um anyways, I guess that's it, now hearing our thoughts on
Yep.
flowery smells. um yeah, I'm just gonna stop recording.